Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC, and it is the week to kick off spring practice for the Gators 2024 edition. We will get into it right here on Gators Breakdown, position by position, likes and concerns. I'm going to make this kind of short and concise, position by position. I mean, of course, we could go really deep, and that would take forever on an episode like this, going position by position. So I'm going to bring up the kind of main storylines that I'm looking at position by position. And as I said, the likes and concerns. Going through this, a lot more likes than I kind of thought I would have here. Kind of going through social media and putting some polls up. I'll try to ingrain them in this episode as well. And just simple questions, what position groups do you feel better about on both sides of the ball? And some apathy there of don't make me pick any of this, but there's a lot of good back and forth there. And like I said, maybe it's hope springs eternal, but I like a lot of this team. I know coming off of 5-7, two losing seasons in a row, in a very critical year 3 coming up. But I still think there's a lot to like about this team. Of course, that doesn't mean they'll go out there and win 9-10 games or anything, but things have to come together for these likes to come to fruition. The likes are a lot of potential, I think. So I see potential in this team. We'll go through it right here on this episode of Gators Breakdown, previewing Spring Practice 2024. Hit that like button, subscribe to Gators Breakdown. You get those notifications when there's a new Gators Breakdown. Leave a comment. That really helps. So you guys know sometimes I'll hop back in here after I post an episode, and I'll throw some comments back there. So, but your support doing those things, like, subscribe, leaving comments, all that support, it really helps Gators Breakdown grow right here on YouTube. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform as well. And then, of course, you can join Gators Breakdown Plus. You get those ad-free episodes there, access to the Discord server where we have those chats. This is kind of the second time I'm previewing this because the last chat, for whatever reason, just recorded my voice and not the chat. So we had a really good episode or chat behind the scenes that nobody else really gets to listen to because there was no if you were there, you took advantage of it. We had a really good conversation, but it didn't get to come out. So but the second time I'm doing this, in some ways I did change some things up right here, giving this preview out. But Gators Breakdown Plus, link is in the description. Extra episodes, chat episodes, as I said, ad-free episodes, of course, is a big plus there on Gators Breakdown Plus. Of course, later this week as well, gatorsbreakdown.com, we will have spring practice coverage. Billy Napier should be speaking, of course, maybe a couple of players as well. We'll have those transcripts up on gatorsbreakdown.com later this week. Gators start spring practice on Thursday, so let's get into it. And, of course, we'll start at the quarterback spot. Graham Mertz coming back, bringing that experience back. No more newness. He can build on last season. I think the biggest question here for Graham Mertz is, has he hit his ceiling? I don't think he has, but I do question how much growth can we expect out of Graham Mertz. And look, I think a lot of that is determined by the pieces around him, the offensive line protecting better, identifying more wide receivers outside of Trey Wilson, the running game replacing Etienne's explosiveness. Mert's experience needs to pay off in ways that, of course, just looking at him, go away from all those other things. Now, this one does play into the offensive line just a little bit, but of course, for him, find a way to not take so many hits, get rid of the ball when he has an opportunity to. And of course, we've all, discussed it, is pushing the ball down the field a bit more. If that sacrifices the completion percentage, okay, I think he doesn't force a lot of throws. Down the field, I think you can take those chances. Sometimes those can just be long punts in third down situations. But no, on the more serious side of that is, if he has to sacrifice a little bit of that completion percentage to push the ball down the field, look, some of that, as I mentioned, will be determined. We'll get into it. Identifying some receivers that can go down and get the ball down the field, be a threat down the field, open up some defenses, take the top off. That's on receivers as well. If they are there and they can identify them this spring, that's where, of course, I think we look for a jump in Graham Mertz. So I do think there's more I don't think he's hit his ceiling here at Florida. I think the experience will pay off. He's not learning, he's not swimming like he was last year and putting it all together for spring practice. He's going to hit the ground running. So, of course, the concern here would be the experience behind Graham Mertz. And look, that's not really a concern that's unique to Florida. That's not a Florida problem. I mean, it is, but it's not solely a Florida problem. I mean, that's the position of quarterback in this world of transfer portal. Stacking QBs isn't going to happen as much, and it's great that you have a 5-star quarterback in Lagway behind, but he just needs to be ready. And this segues into how will Lagway be used. Think we see short yardage situations at the very least, red zone opportunities at the very least for Lagway. Of course, this spring will be huge in that, figuring those things out, figuring out how much he can handle, figuring out how much he is ready for. He's gonna get a crack at it. I think we know that. Clay Millen also comes in as a depth piece with some experience behind him at Colorado State, but of course not the SEC experience. So the experience behind Mertz, of course that's a college football problem, not a Florida problem, but it still is a concern. If something was to happen, we saw Mertz go down late in the season, you probably would be turning the page to 5-star Lagway. Now, that's nothing to really be concerned about in the spring. You'll be protected like crazy, of course. But this is where you get DJ Lagway ready, Clay Millen ready, if they have to take over. We see the first steps of those guys in Florida Gator uniforms. But, of course, with Lagway is probably one of the biggest questions that everybody's going to ask is, how much do we see of him? How much can he handle? A lot of this is on him as well. How much can he handle? The responsibility for him is going to be put on himself. Him getting himself ready. And the good thing about that is he's been doing a lot of things dating back to his senior year of high school after he committed to Florida of getting ready for this opportunity. We'll have a lot more on quarterback this week. Seth Barnador will join me. He's been at some coaches' clinics where Billy Napier has spoken about Mertz, about Lagway. We'll get into quarterback a little bit more, but there's what I like about it. I like Graham Mertz. I like his experience coming back. I really do. I think it's going to pay dividends for Florida. Having an experienced quarterback, Napier having an experienced quarterback here for the first time at Florida, I think is going to go a long way. You got a 5-star quarterback waiting in the wings, waiting to be unleashed in some creative ways. All right, let's keep it going. Like I said, we're going to keep this one quick. We're going to flow pretty quick with this one. Running back. I like the depth of this room, and I think we get to see it on full display this spring in some ways. I want to go back to the question I just asked about Graham Mertz. Let's ask it about Montrell Johnson. Has he reached a ceiling? Is there more from Montrell Johnson? 3rd season at Florida, 4th season overall, come with Billy Napier from Louisiana. No Trevor Etienne to pair with him. What's his ceiling like? Is there more from Montrell Johnson? I mean, he's good enough. He came back to raise that draft stock. What we have seen from him is good. How much better can Montrell Johnson be? And, of course, Trayon Webb taking over for Etienne. He's going to replace him. Cam Carroll being limited this spring. Bouncing back from that knee injury last year. Still nursing. They're playing it on the safe side. There's some caution here. So that opens up the door. And what kind of spring practice is for a lot of the times, this really opens the door for the freshman running backs, Kanan Daniels, Jaden Ball, to be that 3rd back this spring. I think Carroll would be involved, but like I said, playing it safe. Kanan Daniels, Jaden Ball, they're going to get plenty of reps. I think overall, there's a good baseline, especially for somebody like Montrell Johnson. We've seen it. I think we know at least what we're getting from him. We'll see if there's some more. But there's a good baseline here of tough, physical runners. My concern is the explosiveness for the huge gains, the home run threats. Short yardage burst in this group really should be here, but I still wonder who's going to bust a 60-yarder. All these guys are in like that 4.5, 40 range. Can they be fast enough to break one? It's a group that I think is deep, but is it deep of the same type of running back? That's what I asked myself about this group. Huge fan of all these guys. Like, Florida run game is going to be good because of these guys. This tough, physical brand of running back. can they identify someone who can take the top off? I mean, Johnson, we've seen the 30, 40-yard runs, but the big, long runs, the home runs, those were coming from ETN. Can anybody else do that? That's what Florida has to identify this spring. Or how to come up with explosives outside of your traditional running backs. And that may be where we'll go next for the wide receiver. That may be Trey Wilson. He's certainly the best receiver Florida has. How creative will Florida get with him? And maybe some handoffs to help that maybe lack of explosion that the running backs have. I mean, this offense's biggest weapon is Trey Wilson. And remember, guys, for him, he didn't take part in spring last year. He was injured at the beginning of fall camp. So now, how would this time of development benefit him? How will he handle being the guy, being the focal point of the wide receiver room? The concern for this group now is replacing Ricky Pearsall. So defenses can't focus on Wilson so much with double teams and bracketing and focus on stopping him. He'll need some help. And Pearsall was able to do that last season. The Gators have to replace that. Chimere Dike comes in from Wisconsin, a rapport with Graham Mertz, dating back to a couple seasons ago. You go and watch his highlight tape, the way they used him a couple years ago, you see a lot of similarities to how Florida uses their wide receivers in the motion handoffs. Dike has shown good ability of catch and run. I think he's going to be starting there with Wilson. And then when we start spring practice, Khalil Jackson. And there's your top three receivers there. Is that enough where defenses can't focus solely on Wilson? Khalil Jackson, some highlight plays last year. We're looking for consistency now. Consistency from Khalil Jackson. Can he make the more routine plays? Don't get me wrong. I mean, he made some jaw-dropping catches at times last year, some highlight reel plays. Those were impressive. We need to see more of those and just more of the routine play. Can he be a reliable third down weapon? Can he be any part of a downfield threat? Speaking of downfield threat, Aiden Mizell, Andy Jean, two first-year guys from last year in their second year now. It was Wilson who was the one that broke out. Those guys now, this is their opportunity. Like if you're watching this, and when I started with these three receivers, Wilson, DK, Jackson, okay, that's an okay group, but I think we know somebody else has got to break through at the wide receiver spot. Is it Andy Jean and or Aiden Mizell? Now, I think for Florida to be its best at wide receiver, one or both of those guys are going to probably have to be a starter by year in, or at least close to the same kind of reps as DK and Jackson. And then we go down the list a bit. Marcus Burke, Quavion Frazier, one of those guys that really need to step up. As we go through spring practice, they've been through enough spring practice. This is their time. If they're ever going to break through at Florida, this is the time to show it. Marcus Burke had a great spring last year, great spring game. Had a highlight in the Utah game last year. Then gets injured and never really finds his way back onto the field. Frazier's barely played last year. Those guys have way too many years under their belt to be sitting on the bench. So I think as we start spring, we have Wilson, DK, and Jackson. I think by the time we get to the season and by the time we get to Florida State in November, we need to either have a heavy dosage of those other guys in conjunction with these guys, or those guys need to overtake. Mizell and Jean, one of Frazier's or Burke. They need to be involved. I have a lot of questions at the receiver spot. Trey Wilson, no question about him. But the load and the focus that defenses will have on him, what would the effect of that be? Florida's going to play a lot of good defenses, like they always do. There'll be a game plan to Wilson to stop Wilson. Now, some of this is on the coaches. of course, to find creative ways to get Wilson the ball because he's going to be the focal point. When opposing defenses and defensive coaches line up or sit down and watch the Florida film, who's the first player you think they are circling? It's going to be Trey Wilson. He needs help at the receiver spot. All right, let's go to offensive line next. Let's go to big uglies. And I think one of the biggest questions as we start offensive line is, what is the health of Austin Barber? Remember, missed games toward the end of the last season. So how healthy is he? How much will he be able to take part in spring practice this year? And in some ways, that might be a silver lining because those transfer tackles getting reps if Barber's out or limited. Those transfer tackles getting ingrained on this offense. On the left side, I think it'll eventually be a battle between Barber and Arkansas transfer Devin Manuel. You got Brandon Crenshaw Dixon, should be the right tackle. Cam Wakes would be the fourth tackle. So a little deeper group and some experience at tackle. Not experience at Florida besides Barber and Waits, but you're bringing a lot of experience in with the transfers. I think it's an upgrade at the position. Florida has true tackles at the spot because now the news has come out, of course, that Damian George getting moved to guard should be a better fit for him. And I mentioned having Seth Varnador on coming up. And, while we talk about offensive line, Seth said in his last video, guys, you can go out there and watch it before we have that episode with him. That's what a lot of it will be based on. But Seth's been kind of going on the coaches clinic around here lately. And at a coaching clinic Billy Napier spoke at, Billy Napier admitted as much that last season he had guards playing tackle. Now, we know that was Damian George. And look, that was addressed in the transfer portal, going out and getting Crenshaw Dixon and Manuel, allowing George to slide inside, more than likely at that right guard spot. Najee Harris at left guard, after getting his feet wet last season, he'll be replacing the transferring Richie Leonard. And of course, the line will be anchored at center by Jake Slaughter. Slaughter getting a lot of love from Pro Football Focus this offseason as one of the top returning linemen in the SEC. A lot of good work from Roger Kearney, I think he'll be pushing for one of the guard spots, maybe center, but Slaughter probably has that solidified. But it should be some good competition there with Kearney on the interior of the offensive line. So look, it feels decent. About 7 names right there along the offensive line: Barber, Manuel, Crenshaw Dixon, George, Slaughter, Kearney, Waits. Now, we got to see how that transition of George, of course, from tackle to guard plays out. You hope it's going to be a better fit than him at tackle. I think what we saw last year, we know that. How much of an upgrade is it going to be from Micah Mazuka, who he's replacing at that more than likely right guard spot? Of course, we got that coaching change among this group with Stapleton out and DeCoster in. But it's time for that development to pay off. This is a group that has a lot to prove. I think if George is a somewhat serviceable guard, and those tackles coming in, I think creating some nice competition to go along with Austin Barber. I think there's a clear upgrade at tackle. I do, whether it's Barber returning and building on his last year, and you pair that with Crenshaw Dixon on the right side, and Barber's in a somewhat competition with Manuel, or Manuel ends up winning out. Barber can get better from what we saw last year. Now there's competition. I'm not sure there was a lot of competition at tackle last year. We go back to that Billy Napier quote. I had guards playing tackle last year. We know just based off of that quote, there wasn't a whole lot of competition at the tackle spot last year for Florida of true tackles, guys that are going to play tackle. Going out and getting the transfer portal was a must, and we get to see it this spring of how much that should mean for the Gators offensive line. So before we move to tight end, I'm going to turn it to Twitter right quick, because about an hour before I hit record, I posted a couple polls, and this one is going to go more toward the offense. We'll go to the defense in just a second. But I asked the question, as far as depth goes, which position group do you feel better about for the Gators? And the two choices I gave was offensive line and wide receiver. Because I went back and forth on this a little bit. Which position group do you feel better about for the Gators? You can leave your thoughts in the comment section. But as far as on Twitter and the poll goes, at about 700 votes, 80% feel better about the wide receiver group. I'm surprised. I'm surprised the gap is that big. Like I said, I'm torn on it. Wide receiver certainly has the better player in Trey Wilson. No doubt about it. But as far as depth goes, Florida going out and getting those tackles, Jake Slaughter at center, Barber, his experience at tackle, Najee Harris, who I feel pretty good about at one of the guard spots, and then Kearney, Waits. And I think there's a lot more on the offense that has actually played a lot of snaps, where I think I actually may feel better about the depth of on offensive line than I do wide receiver. I think you can go 7, 8 on offensive line. We go to receiver. Trey Wilson leads the way. Man, but Florida needs going back to that one more time, help around him. Now, overall, I think the potential of the wide receiver group can be higher. Throw in Gene and Mizell. If you get a breakout from somebody like Burke, who can be a downfield threat, I can see the potential of the wide receiver group being better. By the time the season starts, by the time the season ends, somewhere in the season, if those guys that have been highly recruited pan out, I can see where it eventually will be wide receiver, but heading into spring, as far as depth goes, I personally feel better about the offensive line, which is weird to say. Definitely weird to say, especially after what we saw last year. But there's been some changes. Pearsall's gone. Trey Wilson's the guy now. And with what happened in the transfer portal, I feel a little bit better about the depth of offensive line for Florida than I do wide receiver. All right, let's keep it going. Let's go tight end. I like that this group gets Keon Zipperer back, another receiving threat to go along with Arliss Boardingham, of course. I think those are two good options for that role. And then, of course, Hayden Hansen is more the blocking tight end, but does offer to make a few plays as well in the air. We saw that. And through the years, Florida's had a lot of names come through this position group the last couple of years, but it seems to have stabilized with this grouping along with Tony Livingston. Dante Zander's gone. Odom is gone from last year's squad. So I think we'll have to wait till, and of course, we'll have to wait till fall to see what big-time freshman tight end Amir Jackson can bring once he gets on campus. He won't be taking part in spring football. But I think hopefully, more consistency comes with the stabilization of this group is the way I'm looking at it. Boardingham was catchless. He didn't have a catch in the last 2 games of the season after having that nice stretch before that. And of course, that big South Carolina game where he was just making plays and a huge cog in why Florida won that game. So some of that due to the injury, of course, Mertz going down late in the season. Max Brown coming in affected the whole wide receiver and tight end route. For tight end, overall, I think this group is a plus in this offense, and maybe can take some pressure off the wide receivers. If Florida's struggling to identify some targets there at the wide receiver spot. But Boardingham, Hansen, Zipperer, should offer Florida some nice options at the tight end spot. There's 2 tight end sets Florida likes to run. We'll see with Callaway coming in how much that changes. This is his position group. Does he have a chance with a returning quarterback to open up the offense a bit more? How, Boardingham could certainly line up in a 4-wide, 5-wide set. Same with Zipperer. Same with Amir coming in. But this group here, at least compared to last year, and I think just overall, it's a plus for the offense. It is a plus for the offense. All right, let's go. Other side of the ball, we're going to go defensive line. Question I got here, How big is the impact going to be from Joey Slackman? Is he going to? He's going to make an impact. We know that. Just had to go out there in the transfer portal, get him because he was that instant impact type of player up front on the defensive line. He's going to make an impact, especially pairing him with in the interior with Cam Jackson. I like that duo. I think they'll feed off of each other. Slackman is the instant impact defensive lineman Florida desperately needed in the transfer portal. Gives Florida a playmaker at the spot, adds depth to an interior that should build on last season. Slackman, Caleb Banks, the main pieces for that little defensive tackle in spot to go along with Jackson at nose tackle. Add that to Desmond Watson, Jamari Lyons. 4 of these 5 were on the roster last year, and they need to build on it. Production wasn't great, only 6.5 tackles for loss in that group, 2.5 sacks, 155 rushing yards per game. That's 12th most in the SEC. So I'm hoping, adding somebody like Slackman to that group, a little more impactful, especially after losing Chris McClellan was a promising young player. So I think you needed somebody with Slackman's experience anyway. It would have been so much better to be able to pair it with somebody like McClellan, who I think we thought was just up and coming player, ready to break through at any point for Florida. So I think the interior, Jackson, Slackman, Banks, that's a good, at the baseline, good group. How much better can Slackman make it? And I think he can make somebody like Jackson better. I mean, complementary play up front is going to be huge for Florida. I mean, Jackson, of course, double teamed a whole lot. I think was a pretty good player transferring from Memphis. Not the actual big time standout, can't miss, making plays all over the field, but a lot of offenses could just focus on him up front. Needed some help up front. Got it there with Slackman. Hopefully you can build on what you put on the field last year. A lot of experience coming back. Let's go to the edge group. Storylines here, of course. The biggest question for this group, who replaces Princely Uman-Mielen as the edge pass rusher? We got 2 spots here at the edge to discuss. The jack, stand-up pass rusher, and then the F spot, the hand-in-the-dirt pass rusher. Florida has to find that jack, that outside linebacker to rush the passer, and it's likely going to be a young player to do so, to come in that group. Uman-Mielen was by far the best pass rusher for Florida last season, and that was with only 7 sacks. Florida really needs someone that can come in and at least match that for this defense to be at its best. More than likely, it's going to need to be better than that. I'm talking about the young players here, the 2 players that I think look at first in that jack role, Kelby Collins, TJ Searcy. Collins did well pressuring the quarterback in his limited chances last year, ranking 3rd on the team in pressures. Some talk, Willie line up at jack, Willie line up at the F spot. If Boone and Sapp are the top 2 at the F spot, then I think Collins needs to be on the field. So that's why that question of where he would go, edge or the F spot, I'm slotting Boone and Sapp in at the F, and I think Collins needs to be on the field. So we'll see how it works out. And of course, down in distance and packages, of course, there's different ways to look at this. But if for the majority of the time, if Boone and Sapp are going to be at the F, I want Collins on the field. And if he can play that jack spot, I'd love to see him there. Searcy should be adding some weight, so he could become more of a factor here as well after he flashed at times. So, if it's not Collins, it's going to be a young player like Searcy. Needs to take those steps. It's time for Collins and Searcy, to grow up. Young guys last year, got your feet wet, got the experience. It's go time. If Florida's defense is going to be better, It's go time for those guys. Looking at this spring, Jack Pyburn's probably going to be pretty limited after his late season-ending injury. So we move to the F spot, and we get the return of Justice Boone. Of course, he missed all of last season after a preseason camp injury. I know for a fact he was highly thought of before that injury last season of making a big impact on the defense. And there's some discussion whether maybe he can stand up at the Jack or F. Hopefully we'll get some clarification this week about these guys. There are some questions about how these guys will line up. With him, it should be Tyreek Sapp as well. And Sapp, of course, had to take over for Boone last season once he went down for injury. So with who Florida has on the interior now, Sapp likely stays at the F spot. He was, of course, playing more on the interior before that injury to Boone last year. I think now, after we just went through the defensive line, there's some depth there for Florida. And of course, can move back and forth a bit, but I can see Sapp more than likely staying in this F spot with Boone. So looking at these two spots, I won't be surprised if Collins and Boone can play both the F and the Jack. But the wild card here, L.J. McCray, the true freshman. You haven't heard me bring up true freshman a whole lot. Did at the running back spot, because I think that third spot might be a little open right now with Cam Carroll. We're just working along right now. Haven't mentioned true freshman at the wide receiver spot. There might be some openings there since we discussed who can step up. There might be something there. But of course, the big get on the defensive side of the ball was defensive lineman L.J. McCray. He's the wild card here. And I was hosting a Florida Victorious Chalk Talk with Jacob LaFrance, the new Florida general manager. Hosted that a couple of weeks ago, and he updated us on McCray, who's now measuring 6'6" and weighing at 275 pounds. And he will begin his career at the edge position due to his impressive pass rushing skills. LaFrance characterized McCray as a freak athlete, and he was showing us highlights and going back, and we saw a whole lot of them at his high school level. Go watch a huddle or whatever, but it's just, you can tell they are just so high on his potential as a pass rusher. So I won't be shocked if McCray makes a big early impact. It's hard to forecast what true freshmen are going to be. But at a spot where Florida needs a lot more proven production, and you lose Princely Umanmielen, he goes to Ole Miss. You got to find it. Don't be surprised if it's a true freshman coming in and making some kind of impact. Cameron James is in the rotation. Brian Taylor, George Gums are also names to watch for these spots. All right, let's keep it going. Let's go to the linebacker group. Going to have to rely on a lot of youth, I think, to see its best. Of course, it's a group led by Shamar James, but I imagine might be somewhat limited too after his late season injury last year. And once again, could be a silver lining. We know what we have in Shamar James. So this spring, with or without Shamar, to me, either way, it's about finding depth behind him and a starter next to him. To me, of course, I'm looking at Pup Howard. I love the thought of him, the starting linebacker group consisting of James and Pup Howard. Two high-profile linebackers that played the position in high school at a high level. You're giving Florida two true linebackers for the first time in a few seasons. Mark Burney was playing linebacker. Scooby Williams was playing linebacker. Those guys were not true, instinctual high school linebackers. They had to learn how to play the position in college. No more tweeners. No more having to move safeties to be linebackers. True linebackers now. So behind James could and should be, I think, true freshman Miles Graham. Another freshman we're going to talk about here. And if James is limited this spring, can really benefit by getting starter-like reps. Rotating in with somebody like a Derek Wingo. But certainly can get more reps if Shamar James is, somewhat limited this spring. We know what we got in him. There's no need to rush it. I'm sure the staff will do their due diligence there. So don't be surprised if we don't hear a whole lot about Shamar James this spring, because Florida knows what they have in him. And we want to make sure he's healthy. So, of course, for somebody like Miles Graham, all these freshmen, big few weeks for his learning. but the physical traits are there. That attacking style of linebacker Florida really needs at that spot. Fellow true freshman Aaron Childs, he'll join in the summer. So I have to wait a little while for him. Manny Nunnery returns after hopping in the portal, but deciding to return. So does Jaden Robinson, who got probably a little bit more snaps than we thought he would last year on the defense. So hopefully he turns that into making more of an impact this year. Spring practice would be for him as well to shoot up the depth chart if it's there. Big spring for all these guys to at the linebacker spot to prove they deserve more playing time. Of course, Derek Wingo returns as well after playing more and more as the season wore on last year. When injuries started piling up for the linebackers. James was injured. He stepped in. I still think can be a contributor in a limited role and help lead these young linebackers. To me, this spring really is at the linebacker spot getting these young guys ready. Howard next to James. Graham to provide some nice depth so there's not a drop-off when James has to come off the field. Jaden Robinson building on last season. If the young guys aren't ready, then, of course, Wingo and Nunnery will still have major roles. But I do think it limits the ceiling of this group. For Florida to be at its best at the linebacker spot, I think Pup Howard coming in his second season, needs to be playing a whole lot. The true freshman, as the season goes on, I think we need to start seeing more and more snaps. Starts this spring. Let's not forget, our safety R.J. Moten, he moves from safety to linebacker. We'll see how that works out. Was a liability on the back end last year, so now we'll bulk up to play linebacker. I have no idea what to expect there. Now let's go to cornerback. I think it's pretty straightforward here. Jason Marshall, Devin Moore. Marshall to hopefully build on improvement late last season. And for Moore, of course, stay healthy. I think it's a pretty good starting combo for Florida to have those two guys together. We'll hopefully have more help up front. And Marshall actually allowed a less catch percentage than the season before, but those catches went for more yards. So you get stopped the big plays. And of course, that was just systemic of this defense, is just giving up the explosive plays. Moore only played in 7 games last season. Looked good when he was out there. Only gave up 30 yards in coverage on 194 chances last season. He just needs to be healthy and on the field. We go backups, Jakeem Jackson, Dijon Johnson, both guys true freshmen last year. Jackson, 113 snaps. Johnson, only 22. So this brings big for them to get the reps, be ready to be that third cornerback on the field, and or back up Marshall or Moore. Maybe even earn a starting role. Maybe one shines and forces more playing time, creating a nice rotation in the backfield. But I do like the combo of Marshall and Moore. Now, has Marshall lived up to the 5-star billing and all that? No, he hasn't. Got a new coach, Will Harris, coming in. Let's see how much he can unlock. I mean, there's another year of experience in the defense. Marshall's got to use that to his advantage. Devin Moore, man, if he can just stay healthy, he can be a difference maker back there. But that tall frame is hard to throw on him. The best ability is availability. I know it's said too much, but it's so true with him. He's a strong point for the Florida defense. He's just got to be on the field. All right, here we go. Let's go to safety in the star spot. A position, this safety group, I actually feel much better about. And I put the poll up on Twitter. Probably not as popular as I thought, but I'm going to throw it out there. I may even feel better about this safety spot than any on the defense. And that's really surprising coming off of last year, of course. I'm taking a leap there. I'll admit, I am taking a leap. I'm looking glass half full right here in this safety room. But with the addition of Asa Turner, Triquez Bridges, DJ Douglas to go along with the return of second-year players Jordan Castell and Bryce Thornton, man, this creates some competition and makes me feel really good because whoever comes out on top, I think they've beaten other good players to earn it. Turner, Bridges, Douglas all bring a ton of snaps. Castell, a ton of snaps in this defense last year. Thornton got more as the season went on. I think it mostly will probably end up Castell and Turner as the starters, but they're much more quality depth at the spot this year. And I think Florida can rotate and not feel like there'll be too much of a drop-off. But a duo of Castell, if he can take and build on the good that we saw, of course he tailed off as the year went on. The whole defense did. There were a lot of injuries piled up in front of him. But if he can build on the good we saw, pair that with Asa Turner and Triquez Bridges and all the snaps that they bring, I like I said, optimistically feeling good about the safety spot. And that takes us to start where maybe a battle brewing between two young players, two second-year players, Sharif Denson, Aaron Gates. Gates battled injuries last season at the cornerback spot. He's shifting over to the star spot, and I wouldn't be shocked if DJ Douglas as well. I just talked about him at the safety spot. If he gets some playing time there, because he played that role at Tulane, played some nickel there. It would give a veteran presence at the spot that may need it some. But I'm looking at Denson to take that spot after getting his late season time. I love his aggressive play at the spot. I won't be surprised if it's Douglas getting it, but there's some word too that Gates will work his way into getting some spots. So, of course, you got to take what the inside info that comes out about some certain players with a grain of salt. We hear it every year, and some guys pan out, some guys don't. But if it's going to be out there, let's share it. So if it does happen, it's not a huge out of nowhere surprise, but there's some good feelings in the building about Aaron Gates. So I think there's a little more competition on that back end. Leads me to the next poll question that I put up, and this was about the defense. Heading into spring, which position group do you feel best about for the Florida defense? And out of 850 votes, like I said, I only threw this up about an hour before I came on. So thanks to everybody on Twitter who's voted in this. If you haven't yet, go, and I might share it later on in the week. Spring practice coverage all week right here on Gators Breakdown. But heading into spring, which position group do you feel best about for the Florida defense? And out of 850 votes, 47% say defensive line and edge. 37.5% say linebacker. 15.7% say the secondary. Now, I kind of went against what I was just discussing here, of course, a little bit. Like I said, I feel better about the safety spot than I do corner, and I put the whole secondary together. Defensive line and edge being 47%. I guess I'm surprised linebackers as high as it is. Like as high as I am on all the young guys, it's a young group. A really young group that's going to, I think, to have its ceiling, rely on a bunch of young guys. Your Pup Howard in his second year. Miles Graham, year one. Aaron Childs, year one. Shamar James coming back from injury. So I think you're going to be relying on some young talent there for them to be their best. Do we see that come to fruition? And if not, then you're relying on Wingo and Nunnery. What's the ceiling? We saw a little bit of that last year. So defensive line / edge, secondary, that'd be my top two. Linebacker would be third for me. Kind of wait and see mode. And you guys know I love Pup Howard. I mean, personal relationship there a little bit, and I hope he comes in right away. But at the same time, I've seen more of Jason Marshall. I've seen more of Devin Moore. Asa Turner, Triquez Bridges bring a ton of snaps. I saw what Jordan Castell did last year as a true freshman. So I feel better about the secondary than I do at the linebacker spot. So defensive line and edge, defensive line, I feel much better edge. Rely on some young guys there too. That's got to come to fruition. So like I said, at the beginning of this episode, a lot of this is based on potential. I going position by position, there's a lot to like. there's a lot to look forward to see if these guys reach their potential. If they do, I think this can be a good team. Probably overcome the expectation. That's how I'm judging all this stuff. It's just basically, can Florida overcome the expectation? It's not go compete for a spot in Atlanta. That's not what I'm doing here. It's not what I'm. The grading scale here is overcoming expectations. I think there's a legit shot at it with a 5.5 win total. That's what it is out there. Going position by position, I can see it. Now, of course, the schedule comes into play. And I'm not looking much at coaches in this spring preview. This is a lot about personnel. Now, of course, breaks happen. Every team gets breaks out there. You need some good breaks to happen. But just looking at the personnel, I can see more than 5.5 wins. Then you got to throw in all the other factors. Those do play a factor. But just personnel, I can see it. I can see more than 5.5. To everybody on Twitter, thanks for going in there and voting. Special teams, quickly, of course, Smack, Crawshaw, nothing's going to change there. Smack coming in last year, did some good things, kind of tailed off as the season went on. Crawshaw, the punter. But who's going to be the returners? That's the big question there. Is it Trey Wilson and Jason Marshall? Marshall's got some, experience there the last couple of years. Wilson with his electricity. Do you want to risk the injury there? I probably would to help this offense fill position. But maybe somebody like an Andy Jean gets in the mix as well. Aiden Mizell. I can see some of the younger receivers getting into the mix as well. So we'll see. Don't get a whole lot of that in spring practice. Something I'm sure they'll work on. New special teams coordinator coming in. So we'll see how Florida attacks special teams. But those would be some of the candidates just based off what we've seen a little bit and where I would go with it. So everybody, all right, thank you so much. Right here, spring preview. I thought at least position by position it went by pretty quick. But as far as an overall episode, still a little bit longer than I thought it would be. But hey, there we go. It just happens sometimes. But hey, try to keep the flow going. Hope you guys liked it. Hope you liked this preview here as we dive into spring practice. Gators on the field Thursday for spring practice. Billy Napier, year 3. And we'll see. We'll get to hear from him. Of course, see what he has to say about kicking spring practice off on Thursday as well. So that'll do it for this episode of Gators Breakdown. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thank you for joining me on this episode of Gators Breakdown.